the power went out for days, my grandmother never missed a hot meal. She had a way of cooking a full pot of stew or beans or a whole chicken that used almost no fuel at all. A few minutes of flame, and then the food kept cooking itself for hours. It's called the hay box or the fireless cooker, and people relied on it for generations before it was quietly forgotten. I'm going to show you exactly how it works, how to build one for almost nothing, and the honest limits of what it can and can't cook. First, the principle, because once you understand it, the whole thing makes perfect sense. When you cook a pot of stew on the stove, you bring it to a boil, and then you turn it down to a simmer, and you leave the burner running for 1, 2, 3 hours, burning fuel the whole time. But here's the thing most people never stop to think about. After that pot reaches boiling temperature, it doesn't actually need the flame anymore to keep cooking. It only needs to stay hot. The flame is just replacing the heat that's escaping into the air. If you could stop the heat from escaping, the pot would keep cooking all on its own. That is the entire secret of the hay box. It's not a heat source. It's heat that can't get out. Here's how my grandmother built hers, and you can do it with things you already have. You take a box or a basket or a cooler, anything with walls. You line it thickly with insulation. In the old days, that meant hay, straw, or wool, which is where the name comes from. Today, you can use towels, blankets, old clothes, or crumpled newspaper. You nestle your pot down into the middle, packed all around with the insulation, with more padding on top, so the pot is completely surrounded. That's the whole device. No moving parts, no fuel, no electricity. And here's how you use it. You bring your pot of stew, or soup, or beans, or rice to a hard rolling boil on the stove for just a few minutes, 5, maybe 10. Then you put the lid on tight. Carry the whole pot to your insulated box, bury it in the padding, and close it up. And then you walk away for hours. The trapped heat keeps the food at cooking temperature, slowly, gently, exactly like a slow cooker, but using a few minutes of fuel instead of hours of it. By dinner time, the stew is done. The beans are tender. The chicken is cooked through. My grandmother would start it after breakfast and forget about it until supper. Let me show you the test. Here's a pot of beans and a thermometer. We boil it hard for 10 minutes. The temperature is right up at boiling. Into the insulated box it goes, buried in blankets, lid closed. We check the thermometer an hour later, still up in the cooking range. 2 hours, still hot enough to cook. Hours later, we open it up, and the beans are tender and fully cooked, having used 10 minutes of gas instead of 2 hours. No babysitting, no stirring, no fuel burning away while you wait. Before the other uses, let me give you the details that decide whether this works perfectly or disappoints you. The things experience taught my grandmother. First, the pot matters. A heavy pot with a tight lid, cast iron, or a thick enameled pot holds heat far better than a thin, light one. The more mass the pot has, the more heat it carries into the box, and the longer it stays in the cooking range. A thin pan loses its heat too fast. Second, fill the pot fuller rather than emptier. A big pot of stew holds heat for hours. A small amount of food in a large pot cools much faster because there's less of it to hold the warmth. A full pot is a better battery. Third, the insulation has to be thick and packed tight all the way around. Underneath the pot, up every side, and a thick cushion on top. Any gap is where the heat leaks out. My grandmother packed hers so the pot was swallowed completely with no airspace. Heavy pot, full pot, packed tight on every side. Those three things are the whole craft of it, and once you have them, it's effortless. Now, this same principle solves more than just emergency cooking. Let me give you the other uses. First, it's a fuel saver every single day, not just in a blackout. Anything you'd normally simmer for a long time, stocks, stews, dried beans, oatmeal, rice, you can boil briefly and finish in the box, cutting your cooking fuel by most of what you'd normally use. Over a year, on every slow-cooked meal, that adds up. Second, it keeps food hot for hours. Cooked a dish early or taking it somewhere? The same box that cooks will hold the meal at serving temperature for hours without drying it out or overcooking it. It's a warming oven that costs nothing to run. Third, it works in reverse, too. A well-insulated box packed with ice or cold packs keeps things cold just as well as it keeps things hot. The principle is the same. It stops the temperature from changing. One box, hot or cold. Now, the honest limits, and these matter. The hay box finishes cooking food that you have already brought up to a boil. It is not a stove, and it cannot brown, fry, sear, or bake. There's no high heat. And here's the important food safety part, so listen closely. The food has to go in genuinely boiling hot and stay above the safe temperature while it cooks. This method is ideal for things that cook by long, wet, gentle heat. Soups, stews, beans, grains, tougher cuts in liquid. For meat especially, use a thermometer and make sure it reaches a safe internal temperature. If the box has cooled too much and the food drops into the danger zone, you bring it back to a boil on the stove before eating. Used correctly, boiling hot in, kept hot, checked with a thermometer. It's a safe, proven method people relied on for a century. Used carelessly, like leaving lukewarm food sitting for hours, it isn't. Respect the temperature, and it serves you well. So why did this disappear? Cheap, abundant gas and electricity made it feel unnecessary. Why insulate a pot when you can just leave the burner on? But cheap energy isn't always there, as anyone who's lived through a long power outage knows. And even when it is, you're paying for every hour that burner runs. My grandmother's hay box asked a different question. Not, how much fuel can I burn, but how little do I actually need? That question never goes out of style. The full collection of these old methods is linked in the description, every one explained plainly. And subscribe, because the next video is one every homeowner should know. The simple way my grandfather kept the whole house warm in winter for a fraction of what people pay now, without turning the heat up. I'll show you exactly how. Take care of yourselves.